foods not being digested appropriately are going to create stress and inflammation in the gut. And then we got to look deeper at, making sure the common food allergens are out, because a lot of times regular food allergens like you get from grains or dairy or lentils or legumes, those can create similar symptoms of histamine. And the question is, well, is there a histamine response to these foods from an inflammatory perspective? It's possible, right? Because the more you create inflammation, we know that histamine is a part of the inflammatory response. It's part responsible for the vasodilation that happens. So it's possible that inflammations from other foods that aren't necessarily histamine sensitive foods could potentially drive histamine symptoms. We have to keep that in the back of our mind. And this is why it's so hard, because you're like, wait a minute, this food's not a high histamine food, yet I'm having high histamine symptoms. How do I connect the dots? And that's how. It's all from inflammation. Inflammation is the first domino, and there's many different domino paths or trails that could take based on inflammation being present. Now, the hidden sources of inflammation are things that we don't really see or we're not aware of, like low stomach acid, low enzymes. We're not necessarily aware of that. We may be aware of the fact, hey, I take hydrochloric acid, I feel better, I have less bloating, I have less gas, I'm more regular, or I do a SIBO test, I treat my SIBO, and my motility, thus my histamine symptoms improve after the fact. That's also another thing that can create awareness, but you may not be aware of it unless someone helps guide you in the process and does some testing as well.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say that all the time it happens to older people. We're talking 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. But in general, I think it's going to be more common for someone who is older because they're going to make less stomach acid just due to age. Now, we have seen kids and teenagers that have a lot of skin issues and gut issues. And I was one of those teenagers. And that's because my diet was terrible, right? So you'll still get younger people that have these histamine intolerance issues, mainly because their gut's been wrecked by antibiotics or they just had a bad diet to begin with. But if we're just saying, as you mentioned, some of these dominoes that fall, one of the dominoes that falls with age is just HCl. So you become at a higher risk of getting bacterial overgrowth because now you don't have enough acid to neutralize what you get exposed to from your foods.
100%. And again, I think part of it is as you get older, there's a natural drop in hydrochloric acid and thus enzymes as you get older. So there's that. So I think age does play a role because of stomach acid dropping. And we need stomach acid to activate our enzymes, and we need stomach acid to activate our bile salts. And we know bile has natural antibacterial effects. So the less bile you have, the more easy it is for bad bacteria to grow. So if we have good stomach acid, that's going to provide an antimicrobial environment, meaning harder for bad critters to grow. And then with good HCl, we also produce better bile salts. Bile salts have that good acid byproduct that keeps bacteria down as well. That's why you see a lot of people that have SIBO, they're also typically taking bile salts to help with, one, the environment, but also two, being able to break down fats. Really, really important.
So how about people without a gallbladder? It sounds like they would be more at risk for this problem then.
Well, they have to be on bile support for life now, because what's happened is they don't really have a gallbladder anymore. Their common hepatic bile duct in the liver is now the gallbladder. And so it doesn't hold bile. Like the gallbladder concentrates bile like 15 to 20x. And then it contracts and punctuates the release of bile at the right time, i.e. you have a fatty meal, you have a hormone that's produced or a neurotransmitter kind of peptide called cholecystokinin that triggers the gallbladder to contract. It releases all this stored bile that's been concentrated, and that bile can now come in and hit that fat and digest it and emulsify it. The problem is you don't have that punctuated release because the gallbladder is gone. So it just kind of drips. It just drips like a leaky faucet all day long. And then you don't have the concentration of it. So it's kind of a little bit more watered down. It's a little bit weaker, and you don't have the concentrated release at time of that fat being ingested. So that's the problem.
Yeah, well, and the conventional doctors don't educate people on this when they go into a potential gallbladder removal surgery. They'll just say, yeah, your liver still is going to make some bile for you, but they don't talk about that concentration factor and how it's literally, that's like taking a little fairy dust of some HCl and throwing it in and hoping it works. It's not a therapeutic amount that's going to come without that gallbladder. I mean, people are still going to survive, right? I mean, there's tons of people living, but it's just, they're not thriving.
Well, what tends to happen after that is to cover up a lot of those symptoms. Conventional medicine says, well, you have to be careful of your fat consumption. Well, yeah, you do, because you don't have the same level of bile output, but you need good fat. You need fat soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. Your long chain omega-3 fatty acids are really important for your health. So yeah, not getting good fats, that's a bad thing. I mean, we've seen with the obesity epidemic over the last 100 years, the last 30 or so years, fat consumption has dropped significantly and weight's gone up. So it's not really a fat issue based on the correlation. It's really a carbohydrate issue, maybe a trans fat issue, maybe an excess refined junky vegetable oil issue, but good healthy fats are not part of the play. And if we now affect our digestion when we can't absorb those things, well, every membrane in our body has good fats in it. So we need healthy fats to make our cell membranes. We need vitamin A, which is a fat-soluble vitamin for our thyroid receptor sites. We need fish oil for inflammation. That's our long-chain omega-3s. We need cholesterol, which tends to come trapped in with animal fat for our hormones, for our brain mass. So all this stuff is so important for healthy hormones, healthy body, healthy brain.